why you've decided to attend this webinar. That would be really interesting. This webinar today is part of our Parenting with a Coaching Mindset series. We also have a conversation going on in LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn group with the same title, Parenting with a Coaching Mindset. Do join us on there, and if we haven't answered any questions, we'll continue them on there, and we can chat. Also, on that note, feel free to contact myself through LinkedIn or through my website, and any of the other panelists who are speaking today. So today's topic: difficult conversations. Difficult conversations with your kids, and we'll be covering the age range from little ones all the way to teenagers. And discussing different topics that our panelists are knowledgeable in, have had experience in as coaches and as parents. We're not experts in this topic, but we can give our guidance and some maybe solutions using coaching tools and our own personal experiences. Okay, so I think it'd be good to introduce our panel. I'm Leah Black, as you all know probably by now. I am a youth coach, a youth mentor, and an all-round youth worker. I'm not a mum. I don't have any children, but I feel like I've had enough experience with teenagers. In my life, I've got 15 years experience working all across the globe pretty much, and online. I'm from the UK, living in Spain, based online. And I think this topic for me is particularly of interest because I worked for 3 years in particular with young people with mental health problems. And sadly, a lot of those young people were self-harming or suicidal. And with that came a lot of child protection issues. So I focused a lot on child protection, and I feel like my job has been very much around difficult conversations. So yeah, I'm quite excited to talk about this because I know the impact that it can have when we do have a good reaction to a difficult conversation. So that's me, and I have with me Lorraine Moose. Lorraine Moose is I'm gonna have to read this, a C-suite leadership executive coach. I hope I've got that right. I'm sure she'll correct me if I haven't. And she runs a coaching business at lorrainemoose.com. And she has had a really positive experience in parenting. She's a mum herself, and she'd like to give back. So yeah, Lorraine's got some fantastic insights on parenting. We also have Tracy Brown, and Tracy is a life and business coach at Switchism, and she is also a mum. And we also have Dr. Kamal Smriti, who is a mother, artist, coach, entrepreneur, and founder of Namita Coaching Services. So, okay, where to start? I would like the panelists, just one by one, to quickly introduce themselves a little bit more, why this is of interest to them. So could we start with Lorraine, please?
Hi, good morning. It's very early in the morning for me here in California. And why this is of interest, I mean, Leah already gave you a brief background. So I have 2 kids, they're grown, they're not kids anymore. And I may have forgotten the smaller parts of what happened during their growing years. But one thing that I do remember very clearly is communication. We talked a lot, and we talked all the time at home. So it's like most issues were handled as they came in or never turned out to be issues. And it's kind of funny, this trend continues even now. So the reason I'm on this panel is to literally give out the message to parents: communication is key. And I'll pipe in if I have any pearls of wisdom to offer with difficult communications, but that's usually things that has to be addressed. It's the elephant in the room, right? And so that's something we need to talk about.
Thank you, Lorraine. I totally agree. And Kamal?
Hi, hello, everybody. Conversations, and so to say, difficult conversation has been very close to my heart. One, because while I was growing up, it was missing quite a lot. So there were several topics, several issues that I could never speak to my parents. We didn't have that sort of a conversational relationship. And I think if I would have had that space to talk it out and to find from their perspectives and just to say what I wanted to say, things would have been much different. So conversation play a very important role in my life with my children and with every other relationship around me. I think that's why it's close to my heart.
Thank you. And Tracy?
Hi. I think what's important to me about being here is as a single mother and someone that had to have many tough conversations with my children over the years. And now that I look at back from a coaching perspective, there's many tools that I wish that I had been aware of as a mom. And also, I think because I was young and because I kind of flew by the seat of my pants, and that's not always the worst thing, but there were, I think, topics that I now, reflecting backwards, wish that I had thought about more before we had to face them head on, such as death and sex and all that, all that stuff. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Tracy. And that's a good point. With difficult conversations, it's actually much easier to prevent than cure within difficult conversations, to be prepared rather than being in that moment when it happens and you think, oh, I wish I'd already addressed this beforehand. What do I do now? And I think to put some context in this, difficult conversations can be anything that anyone struggles with that's difficult, but we're going to address things like death, sex, drugs, bullying, moving house, separation, illness, stuff in the news, etc. All these things can be really difficult to talk about, some more than others. And please feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we'll try and answer them if we can. When you do put your questions in the chat box, put to all attendees and panelists so we can all see them. Okay, so to the group of panelists, I have a question. In regards to all those topics, when and how can we be honest with our children in difficult conversations? Because honesty is absolute key. Lorraine, I think you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, honesty is key. I would say, as you establish your relationships with your kids, with your family, it's just because you cannot layer a difficult conversation or tackle something that is really important to your children if you haven't established that connection. In fact, I recall my daughter when she was 13 or 14 saying to me, because she'd come back and talk to me about her teenage friends who perhaps were hiding things from their parents and struggling with things. And I asked her, I said, but why don't they just speak to their parents? And she said, oh, Mom, we've been talking for a long time. You can't suddenly wake up at 13 and then start talking to your parents. And I recall that. So it's just having a culture of trust and engagement and, the psychological safety, to put it in coaching terms, that is so, so huge. So most conversations, even if they're uncomfortable, tend to be easier once trust is established and once communication is a norm in the house.
Absolutely, Irene. And I remember I used to teach sex education to young teenagers. And I'd have that conversation with the parents beforehand to check everyone was okay and to tell them what I'd be talking about. And they'd be like, oh, Leah, thank you so much. You can do this. We don't have to do it. I'm so grateful. They trust you. They can speak to you. With us, it's awkward. And it always made me think, but why? Why is this so awkward? Why can we not talk about this earlier? So yeah, I think that opening up and having conversation from a young age is a really, really good way to build this, but it's not unusual. It's not unusual for parents to end up in that difficult conversation once a child's a teenager, and other teens to go, oh, why aren't you talking about this? Tracy, you've got your hand up.
Yes, coming back to when it's important to be honest with your children, or when are they ready for the honest answers. And I think if they're old enough to ask the question, then they're old enough to receive an answer. And as for when to be honest, I would say always, and that's not easy. But I can think of 2 examples that I still think about with my own children, where one was a small fib, and one was a situation that was quite tragic, and I just didn't feel like they were ready to know the whole truth about. And both of those, they ended up, I mean, the thing is, kids grow up, right? Hopefully, and they're going to learn about it. They're going to find out about it. And then there's that lack of trust when they find out that you weren't open with them. And not only that, a lot of times, and this was really striking, I was listening to a podcast last night, and it was Brene Brown, and she was talking about a study that they did, and children were dying, and these children hadn't been told they were dying. But they all knew. They were young children, and they all knew. And they actually said, no one has told us about this, so it must be really bad. So knowing that, just imagine what's going on in their heads without information, and what's coming up for them as to why this information is being concealed.
Tracy, that's such a good point, because also children, I mean, I've not worked with little children, but I do know with teenagers, they know when something's going on, and they know when you're not being honest. We're all human, no matter what age we are, we have that sense. And something that kind of occurs to me is, especially little children, when we're born, we can't speak. We communicate non-verbally. So we have it in every single one of us to read when something's not right. And then we make up our own story of the truth. And that's when things can get quite bad, and mental health problems can start, etc. So honesty for me, especially when working with teens, is so important. And to be honest about our own experiences. You know, not so honest that we traumatize somebody, depending on what we've been through. I've been through some quite horrible things, and I wouldn't want to traumatize, you know, if I had kids, my kids or the young people I work with. But actually to show a tiny little bit of vulnerability, Brené Brown is amazing at that, is important, because we're teaching young people to open up and not keep things in. And that, you know, bad stuff does happen. Difficult moments do happen, but we have each other and we can share that. So anyway, Kamal, I noticed your hand was up earlier.
Yes, hi. I absolutely agree with all of you that honesty is the key. And that's such an important point, Lee, that children, no matter how young or how old they are, they know. They have inherent senses in them to catch when you're being honest or when you're trying to just, hide away something. And that is the part which you don't want to pass on to them, because then there are so many different questions. And then while they are questioning your behavior, a part of them is also understanding that maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay not being honest at times. And so both the things sort of happen simultaneously in their minds. Though there could definitely be some situations where you know that the whole answer or the whole truth is going to do more harm to them than doing anything right. For example, my son was very, very young, and there was this one rape case that happened, and it was quite brutal, and it was all over the media. People were talking, and somehow, somewhere in the news, he caught it, and he asked me, "Mama, what is rape?" He would probably be like 4 years old. I mean, how would you explain what is rape to a 4-year-old child? But I can't even hush everything through. He's asked a question and I must give him an answer. And I didn't want to. And this is one topic, or one question with which even we don't know in entirety, even we haven't made peace with it and all. So I was like, okay, but I have to tell him something. So I explained to him in a language that he can understand, trying to correlate it with the examples that happen around. I mean, of course, not adding the sexual part of it, because obviously he wasn't that old to understand all of it. And he was okay. And I think maybe when he grows up later on, there'll be an opportunity to open up other layers, because certain issues and certain things come in the layers, and with every age and phase, a different layer of it opens up to you. So you be honest, tell them as much as they're ready to grasp. And absolutely what Tracy said, they tell you, they ask you the question when they are ready to receive the answers.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Kamal. It's very, it kind of makes an impact to be able to hear people's experience and to share that. So I do really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I think on that note, how do we react to these difficult conversations when they suddenly come up? How do we react to them? And I think from my own experience of literally at some point I was having weekly disclosures of abuse or really serious situations, ranging from drug abuse, sexual abuse, severe bullying, all these different things, and I have to react in the right way. And the right way for me is human. It's the human way to react. It's that not freaking out. You can hear some things that will emotionally grasp you. And I've heard some stuff that has made my heart go into my throat. And emotionally you think, I'm going to bubble up. But is that really the right thing for a child to see at that time, or that reaction? Maybe that young person or child finds what they're talking about normal to them. Maybe this has been going on for a long time, and especially around abuse. And if it's been going on for a long time, if you react like, what? Oh my gosh, then suddenly a child might close off. So for me, it's this being human in the sense of don't freak out. Don't prepare a response based on an assumption, of what has happened. And I think I'll talk about this a little bit more, about how I reacted, as that could be helpful in different situations. But it's all about the power of conversation, of listening. Tell me more. And the gratitude, thank you. Thank you for having the trust in me to talk to me. Thank you very much for opening up. I'm really happy that you can tell me this, that you've chosen to tell me this. And I think for me, in any kind of difficult conversation, it's never presume. That's important. Never presume what really has happened. Never promise. Don't make any promises, because you don't know the whole full story. So you don't know how you're going to react. And especially with child protection, we need to make sure that we get help if help is required. And also never to lead. So those open questions, which I'll talk about a bit more later, and not to react. That for me is key, not that reaction, that calm, take a breath and just relax. And on that note, the environment as well. In those difficult conversations, maybe you might need a few moments, depending on what it's about. Maybe you don't, maybe need to answer there and then, but to make a cup of tea or get some water and relax into it and kind of get in the right mindset. So yeah, that for me, in any difficult conversation, it's open questions and not reacting. I wonder if anyone from the panel could answer that, how to react. Oh, Nishmita is jumping in. Nishmita from Coach Arya.
No, actually, I had a question to add. So after this, I'll jump in and ask that question. Sorry, I got a bit excited.
No worries. Lorraine?
You know, what I'd like to say here is we may not have the answers all the time. And I think to be okay to pause. Now, as you were speaking, something came to my mind. My daughter had discovered one of her friends who was a few years older than her. And this is when she was in probably her late teens or early, maybe even 20, had been sexually abused through her whole life by her parents and actually sexually trafficked by her own parents. And she was beside herself and said, Mom, I wanted to see what a strong mother figure is like. Can you please come and talk to her, what have you? So we met and we went to I went to their campus, actually. This was on college campus. And I still can see this experience this day as I'm speaking with you. But and it's beyond anything I could ever imagine. And I know these things happen, but having been blessed with a really comfortable life, this was beyond comprehension for me. And I recall we got our ice cream and we were sitting there on the benches at the side of the cafe. And she looked at me and she said, Mrs. Moose, why do my parents not love me? I didn't know what to say. She was at that time 23 or 24 and emancipated from her parents. But that was her first question. And I just looked at her and I said, can I give you a hug? I'm so sorry. I don't have an answer to that. You know, the only thing I can tell you is that we're all people and we end up being parents. Some of us get luckier than others. Some are still on their own journey of learning, and it's so unfortunate, but I don't have an answer just now. That part still stays with me. So we may not have the answers. And what can you say? What can you say in a situation like that? So.
Thank you for sharing, Lorraine. You know, all those situations, we don't know how we'll react and we might not have the answer. And actually being vulnerable and saying that we don't know what to say, that is okay. But what you showed, which for me is key to all of this, was compassion. Compassion and a listening, calm ear. You know, that reaction of, can I hug you? That just shows that compassion was in your heart. And to say that, you know, we don't get to choose who our parents are or some of the situations we end up in. So I like the way you explained that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Kamal.
Yeah, that's indeed a very, very touching story, Lorraine. And I was thinking, and that's right, you know, we don't always have all the questions to every problem of our own. Let it be of the people other than us. But I think mostly whenever somebody has gone through such kind of experience in life, first and very important thing that they need is to be heard, to be seen, to be accepted, and to be shown that kindness, because every negative instance sort of takes away that little hope from you, leaves a negative impact with you. And if you can't do anything for that negative impact, at least leave them with more positive impact, so that, you know, there's a sort of a balance that they derive, and then they can make a choice based on both experiences. Because if it's all negative experience, then they don't have anything, you know, aside, anything different, anything positive. So I think we may not have answer, and that's absolutely true, to stay vulnerable and say that I don't know this, but then leave them. What do you leave them? Maybe not solution, but a lot of kindness, a lot of love, you know, and that always helps in their journey.
Thank you, Kamal. And Tracy?
Yes, I was thinking about, when you were talking about that reaction, I was thinking about in the coaching space and how we, as coaches, we want to be empathetic to our clients and we're holding a space for them, but we're not crying with them and we're not getting angry with them. We're not feeding into whatever emotion that is there. We're providing a safe space for them to be able to work through that. But having said that, we're also taught congruence. So if something's coming up for us from what they're saying, and especially with children, with parents, they will sometimes ask how we feel about something. And I think in that case, coming back to honesty, then there does need to be a sharing. There are going to be times that they say things that are going to raise anger or fear in us. And, we need to be upfront with that. But going back to what Kamal said as well, as long as they know that there's always that love. So even this right now I'm feeling angry, but, I love you. And so as long as that is never in question, I think that's key.
That's so true. So true. And I think coming back to how to react before, there's something that I 100% avoid, and I literally try to never say to a child in a difficult conversation, is why. Just don't say why. Please delete that word out of your brains. A lot of parents that I used to speak to would be like, oh, Leah, why does my child feel that they can speak to you and not me? And I'd be like, well, tell me, how did you try? Well, I wanted to find out why they'd done it. No. If you ask a child, why did you do that? Why didn't you tell me? Why haven't you told me about this when it first happened several months ago? Why didn't you tell a teacher? Why didn't you react? Why? You've cut the conversation, because instantly that blame, even though we don't mean to, by our curiosity killing the cat, we're stopping the conversation. Delete why from your brains. What I do instead is the first thing I will always say in a difficult conversation after the gratitude of opening up is, tell me more, tell me what's happened. And I shut up. And then as they're talking and I'm listening fully there, and I will then react when appropriate, when silent, even if that means that young person has spoken for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, I'm there listening to them. But what I do want in those difficult conversations is to try and understand the thinking of the child, the mind of the child, and what they're going through. And I use the who, what, where, when, how as my open questions. Never, ever use a closed question. Did that person do this to you? Did this happen at school? Did this happen in her home? Don't do that, because you're instantly again closing that conversation and putting ideas into a child's mind, or they might just stop thinking. So always use open questions and never use why. And yeah, I think for me that is very much key. And also, we can't promise that we won't be able to share what they tell us. But what we can do is, if it's something that doesn't need sharing for child protection reasons, is keep that confidential, to keep the trust. I remember when I was younger, I'd tell maybe my mum something or somebody else, and then somebody else would know about it a few days later. Well, I'm not going to tell her or them anything again that's serious, because I know that it's going to go somewhere else without me knowing and without my permission. So that for me is quite important. And don't try to have your say. This isn't about you in a difficult conversation. If it's a child disclosing drugs, abuse, etc., bullying, whatever, try to understand them, be curious. And at the end of that conversation, if you can, raise their awareness. It's about gaining support and about raising their awareness of that topic. Tracy, I noticed you put your hand up.
I did, yes, although you covered some of it, because that's what came up for me. Most questions that involve why can be rephrased very easily to be a little more open and inviting. And why really is a bit of an antagonistic question, almost. I get defensive when somebody asks me why. And I think, as well, we're not there as parents to be investigative reporters. You know, we're not there to be judge and jury. And a lot of the times when we're trying to find someone to blame for something, and definitely your situation is very different when you're coming in with a situation with abuse. But a lot of times I know for myself, when I'm trying to get to the villain in the story, that's because I'm trying to absolve myself from any self-blame or blame. So I think, like you said, just sort of leaving it really open and not leading them, and listening. And the other thing I wanted to add to that, definitely raising awareness is key, but also not every moment needs to be a learning moment. So kids don't want to be preached to all the time. They want to be able to share something without you spinning it into an after school special, you know? So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Tracy. And yeah, I love that. I totally agree. Not everything has to be about learning, does it? About having our say. Thank you. Nishmita.
Yes, hi. I do want to share something actually. As I was listening to all of you speak, I think one very important thing to do is also to make sure that you never tell the child how to feel and validate the child's emotion. There is a tendency sometimes, like as a defense, that the adult might just laugh the situation off or make it look like it's not that big a deal, just so that, you know, the child doesn't take it so seriously. But what that does, I think, to the child is make the child feel like I'm stupid for feeling this way, or I should not feel this way. So I do think that, you know, even if we don't know what to say to the child or anything, like just allowing them to feel what they feel is very, very, very important.
Thank you, Nishmita. That's so true. You know, everyone feels differently in different situations as well. And, you know, it takes, we have to learn the who of the person, who they are, how they react, and how they feel. So I think that's really important. Thank you. Has anyone else on the panel got something they'd like to jump in with? Kamal?
Yeah, so with all this why questions going on, I recall an incident from my teenage, when I was teen. So there was this one time when I was very depressed, and so I thought that, oh, maybe my dad will understand what I will say, but I didn't have it in me to go in front of him and talk to him, because I knew that the moment I'll try to open my mouth, I'll start to cry. That used to happen with me. So I wrote him a letter. And though I didn't know that I'm in a depressed state, I didn't know what my state is basically. I was just feeling a few things. And then I wrote him a letter and I left it on the table. And all I said to him is that I've left something for you, please read. So he read it. And in the evening, till evening, I waited and he didn't come and talk to me. And I was like, what's happening? Did he read? Did he not read? And all of that. So then I went and checked with him. I said, did you read it? He said, yes. I said, and he was like, why are you so depressed? And two things happened. One, I figured that what I'm going through is called depression. And he was able to make out by reading my letter. But then he's asking, why are you so depressed? I didn't have any answer to that question. It sort of shut me down entirely. And after that, I never made any attempt to go and talk to him, because I didn't know my situation. I was seeking answers. I was not ready to answer a question with a why. Later on, of course, I found out and figured out that, you know, he also had certain things. And most of the times, that's what I would say that, you know, bring this thought that why certain conversations are difficult for parents or people is because they don't have a model, or they don't have, you know, a clarity within themselves to refer to that particular conversation, or they don't know in that moment how to address that situation. And if they are dealing with their own inner judgments that, oh, I'm supposed to be helping but I'm not able to help, and then they shut down. So to stay open in that situation and to just ask the right questions, or even to be honest and say that, it always helps. So yeah, thankfully I've learned a lot from those situations and experiences.
Thank you for sharing, Kamal. I appreciate it. And Lorraine, you had your hand up.
Yeah, to actually connect the dots through what a lot of you have said. Leah, when we started, you said you spoke about body language and taking cues when things were not right. And really, the most important part of any conversation, as we've learned, and it's part of coaching, it's part of life, is listening. Listening to what is said, listening to what is not said. I'm not saying make up your own story, but listening, ask for clarifications. And when you're engaging, showing that you care, that's all the other person needs. It's like, oh, they understand or they get it. And my usual question after my kids would come and say, oh, and such and such happened in school and this, and whatever. And I would find them upset. I'd say, oh, how does that make you feel? And then they would start to say, I felt bad because of such and such. And then my next question would be, would you like my help to handle this? And then by that point, we'd gone through this so many times. So they had their own, like, no, mom, I'm going to let them know, or I'm going to write a note, and whether it was a teacher, whatever. But the fact that you're there and then you inquire after that. There was a situation that I had, it's showing them support. This is not quite a difficult situation. But I recall my daughter, when she was in about 7th grade, was blamed for something she didn't do by a teacher who was a very tough teacher. And she was actually derogatory to her in class. And when I picked my daughter up, she was like in tears. And she said, oh, that's so, this is what happened. And I said, oh, how does that make you feel? And she said how it made her feel. And I said, so would you like me to have a conversation with her? And she said, no, I'll write her a letter. And I'll let her know. And I thought it took a lot of courage for a 7th grade to say, I'll write a letter to a very tough teacher in school to sort her issue. So she wrote that letter. And then Komal, to come to what the response was, like when you wrote a letter to your dad, that teacher ignored her for a whole 2-3 weeks. So I said, oh, did she respond? And she said, no. So this is where I feel then you need that support for the next level. So I said, okay. And I made an appointment with the principal of the school. And I went to him and I said, this such and such happened. I'm not saying my daughter is perfect, but I'm fine to hear if there really was a problem. But what I want to say, as you as an educator and me as a parent, our role is to build self-esteem and confidence in our children. I do not sit with my children with their homework. That's their issue. They do their own homework. But I said, I am so mindful about raising their self-esteem, their confidence and sense of self. So I related what happened and I said, and she hasn't heard back. I said, that is not acceptable to me. At the very least, she owes her a response. That I want to reinforce to my child that when something doesn't work, you can speak up and you can sort your issues. And so he did that. And then the teacher 2 days later came to her and said, hey, you're all okay with that. And please tell your mom that as well. But she said something. Do you know what I mean? That reinforces things at many, many levels. So it's kind of bringing everything together it's not that one difficult conversation, but things happen in life. So, well,
I think
Thank you.
Leah's gone on.
I think Leah froze a little bit.
Yeah. In the meanwhile, if I may ask a question of Komal, you raised your hand. So
Yeah, no, what was coming to me is that these difficult conversations are not just for parents, but for teachers as well. Everybody who's a part of that ecosystem for little ones to grow up and all. So yes. Your question, Nishmita.
Yes, so I wanted to ask about, so sometimes there are things that happen at home that you don't want the outside world to know, and fairly so. Like, there are certain things that need to be controlled, like the information that goes out. Like, say there is but a child is very innocent, and a child does not know what a secret is and what is not. But, when you put that thing in the child saying, don't tell anyone, did you tell someone about this, it puts a lot of pressure on the child. And so how do you deal with something like that? I just wanted to know.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And haven't we sort of experienced that situation quite a lot of times? But I think yes, that's a little tricky question. Thankfully, with our children, we have less and less of things which are like secrets, because when there is an open environment for conversations, there are no trade secrets you're discussing with the children, right? But then when you're discussing every other thing, and when you are so, if there is nothing to hide, which means there's nothing which is going to come and impact you, don't ever need to tell that to your children. It's only in situations when, as a parent or as an elder, you think that, oh, there is something that will impact or that will create a negative perception in other people. So I think first thing is, and very important, is to sort out your own mind and then ask yourself as to why do you think in the first place that this is something which is going to create a perception, and then how does it matter? Why does it matter? How does it matter if other people are not going to think in a certain way to you? So these questions in my mind are directly related to our control for certain image that we like to portray. And I think that's a whole Pandora's box to open up and discuss as to why as parents we would like to bring our children into that area of trying to impose certain image or to be in certain way, or us as a family too. And yeah, but that's a very important question, Nishmita. Yeah, my take is that just be honest, have nothing to hide, and be who you are, and let your children see that that's the way to be. That's it.
Tracy.
Yes, I 100% agree. I think evaluate why you're trying to keep something hidden from somebody else. If there's something that's coming up in you that feels uncomfortable with your child sharing, then why is that? But I also think on the other hand, it's very important to explain to children why gossiping isn't okay. So while, we don't want to have family secrets and we don't want to discourage them from being open about things, we also want to explain to them some of the harm that gossip can do. So that's the other side of the coin. That's also can be a little bit of an uncomfortable situation, but it's also something that, they also may learn from us. If we are, if they hear us dishing about other people, they may be thinking that it's okay to do that themselves.
Leah, just to let you know what we were talking about, I asked about keeping secrets. I mean, enforcing your child to keep secrets from the outside world, like, that pressure or about just not letting anyone know about what's happening in the family and stuff like that.
Thank you, Nishmita. Thank you. And I was wondering now whether we could make this a little bit, I don't know, juicy. Is that the word I can use? Should we start talking about sex?
Just to 1 second though, Chris has asked if he can share a story that he says, Leah, I have a story to tell if you want me on the panel. Would you?
if that's okay.
Okay, so Magda, are you here? You'll have to bring Chris up on the panel then.
While you're doing that, I think if we can carry on with this topic, and then when Chris is up there, he can tell his story on that. Okay, so sex. Sorry, Chris. You asked the question at the right time. Okay, so at what age? Well, no, let me rephrase that. When are our children old enough for us to talk about sex with them? Who will go first on this? I work with teenagers, and I'm very, very open about sex when that conversation comes up with any age in the teen years, because it's something that we need to talk about. It is part of life, and if we don't talk about these things, that's when things can go wrong. As I said before, prevention is better than cure. And in the topic of sex, prevention really is better than cure. Okay, I've seen a few hands up. So Tracy, if you want to jump in.
Yes, I think one of the things that I was thinking about, there's a quote from Einstein, and it's, if you can't explain to a 6-year-old, you don't understand yourself. So if you're having trouble explaining sex to a child, why is that? I mean, we know what it is, but what are our own feelings that are bubbling up about it that are making it uncomfortable for us to say it? Because why is it different from other bodily functions? It is a part of life. And I think it was Lorraine earlier that had said death, like death is a part of life, sex is a part of life, birth, all of these things. So the more natural we are about it, I think, for one thing, the more comfortable children will be to ask. And while we're not going to be explaining it to them, in vitro, they sense when there's something that we're not comfortable with talking about. They sense when we're feeling, even shame. Let's say they come running out, and this has happened, little kids come running out and they're fully nude. And then, there's a friend over and you're chastising them to go put some pants on. That initial reaction, now, while it's important to explain to kids why they can't go running, go to school naked, but that initial reaction that you might have when they're touching a part of themselves, or when they're, coming out and they're not fully dressed, they pick up on that and they record it and they remember it. And then they're going to feel a lot less comfortable coming to their parent when they do hear something at school and they have questions about that.
Absolutely, Tracy. And Kamal, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. So I think, so for me also, I've had this little experience of discussion with both my teenage daughter and my son, although the contexts have been different and the texture of the conversation was also different. Like my daughter, when she came into teen, and it's not just her, but the entire class sort of, started to go through that transformational phase, and then their discussion topics got changed. Then they started to come into this, started to experience their relationships, girlfriend, boyfriend concept. And then, so we sat, so one day she came. So it was quite a routine that she would come with some new information that she got from her friends in the school, and then she would come and sit and discuss with me. Mom, do you know this? Do you know that? And I'm like, okay, yes, I know. What is it that you want to talk about this? And so we sat and discussed everything, like the difference between gender and sex, and different sort of sexual, preferences that people have. What is a gay? What is a lesbian? Who's a heterosexual, bisexual, and all those sort of things. And it just flew very normally, because she herself was so curious and she has some little background, and then she was able to compare as to what she's found from people in the classroom, and then, how she's discussing with me. And then she was like, Or then why some people, and then all sort of questions would come. Then why some people would not talk about these things or would not be open, and then the conversation will go deeper. But because she had that curiosity and she knew that she can come and talk to me, it was very open, very clear. And I think that space is quite important. And then the conversations with my son are more around, when was I born? I was in your tummy. Then how did I come out? And the very normal question which every parent face. And sometimes they don't know, oh my God, how to answer. Then what will happen after I answer this question? What next question will come? And I was like, forget about what will be their next question. If they're curious in the moment, just tell them that this is how it is. And yeah, that sort of simplifies a lot of things, because once you've started that conversation, and another thing I think is, the more you normalize sex, the better it is. Because just like Tracy said, Lauren said, these are the parts of life. You can't just make one part larger than the rest of the life, or just try and suppress it. It's just like any other conversation.
Thank you, Kamal. I totally agree. And I think as well, we live in an age where all children are curious. Every single, that is the key word for children, curious. And now we have the internet. And even though you might have every single safety feature on your internet at home, it doesn't mean that their friend has every single safety feature on their phone. And it is much better to have that honest conversation at home with your parents, with someone trusted, with family, than to go looking at a website where we're going to see people, especially when it's to do with sex, who don't even look natural sometimes, and we're going to make people nervous about what sex is and how they need to be, and there'll be so many different fears that arrive. Also, working with teenagers, and this especially, I've worked a lot in many different countries, but I was working in Kenya at one point, and I got told, Leah, you cannot teach sex education here. You can teach everything else, personal, social, but the health, just hide away from the sex. Abstinence. If you tell a teenager to abstain from something and don't give them the information that they need, curiosity, that key word again. What is this thing that I'm not allowed to do? What is this thing that everyone keeps really quiet about and they can't talk? It must be good. And we all know that teenagers are going through a period in their lives where they're testing out becoming their own person. They want to be an adult. What are these things these adults are doing? Why are they so good that we can't talk about them? That honest conversation, if you have it at home, you're actually protecting your child as well. You're actually helping them not to be so potentially curious when it comes to sex. It helps to talk about it. I've heard people say, oh, Leah, you shouldn't be talking about sex with teenagers because it could encourage them to have sex. My belief is it's actually the opposite. If we can be honest and put this subject on the table, and when those conversations come up about how is a baby born, etc., the pressure isn't all on you. There are millions of books out there, images, good biological photographs that we can talk through, books aimed at specific ages. Get them, be prepared. This isn't all on your back. There are people out there who've been working in this field for years. They've prepared the resources for you. And for me, when I have that sex conversation with a teenager, especially the younger kind of age, don't make it so like, oh, eye to eye, bit of a talk, have that sex chat. It's not like that. It's human. Let's be relaxed about it. I always have a table when I'm working with young people with you know, age appropriate, we do need to be careful. There are certain things that we're not going to teach to an 11-year-old that we may teach to a 16-year-old. But things like contraception, let's see the range of contraception. Let's talk about it. It's not that you might need to use it. You can decide not to have sex until you're in your 20s. Even later, you know, that's your choice. But let's talk about the options, and let's not be scared. Let's not be scared of this, because that fear can cause so many problems as well. And I myself didn't know of all the range of contraception until my late 20s. And I didn't know there were all these injections you can have, and, you know, things they can put in your arm, and patches, and all these different options. So talking about options kind of opens that table, and you can show them. Also, sexually transmitted diseases. We don't talk about that. We can talk about contraception, which prevents the disease. But what is this disease? What are these diseases that we talk about? And, you know, depending on how you want to approach this, for me, because I'm quite comfortable in the subject, and I do believe that knowing is helpful and can protect. So I actually do have appropriate photographs, before you judge me there, of the different types of diseases that we can talk through. And there's no better contraception, believe you me, when working with teenagers than talking about the diseases. So it's all about putting this on the table. Also, if that conversation comes up from your child, especially when they're a teen, find out what they already know first. What a great conversation starter, rather than you going, where to start? Start with them. What is it that you know? You know, tell me. And be relaxed. Bit of humor as well, a smile. Those awkward conversations, they're just not good. And Mythbusters, I always have a sheet with all these little myths around sex, and it's a great conversation, because it's not you having the conversation. You have a sheet and you're going, okay, there's this, what do you think? And it's kind of a two-way conversation rather than all the pressure on you. So yes, for me, it's have that conversation whenever you can. Okay, right, next one then. It's a little bit sadder. It's not as juicy at all. But when should we approach the topic of death? You know, this is a tough topic, and it's a topic that I wasn't taught when I was younger. And I'm very accepting of death now as an adult. As a child, I was very lucky that I had pets, because you do get used to death with pets, but nobody had that conversation with me. And I remember as a little child being highly traumatized when my goldfish died, Arthur Moon, and he was flushed down the toilet. Arthur Moon, do you get it? Arthur Moon. Flushed down the toilet when he died, and I was very upset and what have you. And a week later, my grandma died. Well, I thought my grandma was being flushed down the toilet. I seriously did think that my grandma was being flushed down the toilet, because no one had that conversation with me. And my head was spinning. How's she going to fit down the toilet? Why would they do that to somebody? And it made me think of things like Father Christmas coming down the chimney, and maybe it's magic. And I had all this story in my head of what death was, until I got a little bit older and realised. So yeah, I'd love to know what your experiences are, panel. Who would like to go first? Tracy?
Sure. Again, I think the more death is not going to be kept a secret for long, unfortunately, because we have no way of predicting when it's going to knock on our doors, enter our lives in some way. Could be a grandmother, it could be a family friend. So it's going to come up, and having to have that conversation when you're in the midst of grieving is going to be a lot more difficult than having being able to talk about it first. I don't have any answers as to how to do that. I just think that if I were to sort of rewind and do things over again myself as a parent, I think having those practical conversations, what happens to you when you die? And the other thing that I think is also really important is many of us have many people have religious beliefs, many don't, you know, but regardless of what those beliefs are and what your beliefs are about what happens to you after you die, I think that I think it's important to not minimize grief and the impact of death based on those beliefs. So even if you say believe in heaven or reincarnation or something along those lines, that this, you know, well, so-and-so's in heaven now, she's happier. Like this isn't going to, this is like a false happy ending to a child. This isn't going to make them feel better. They're still feeling the loss right now. So definitely, I think having the conversations around what happens to you, what happens to your body when you die, what does that mean? That means you may never see somebody, you won't see somebody again, at least not in this, you know, world. Knowing that, and having that awareness before they're hit with, you know, the death of someone that they're close to.
Thank you, Tracy. And it is hard, and it is hard to approach that subject, and different beliefs as well. And I think each person's going to react to this very differently as well, based on beliefs. And for me, this conversation again comes down to that open, honest conversation, and early on, so you don't end up in a situation like I did. I do think it is important to talk about it, and if we don't know about death and we don't talk about it, how do we react to death when it happens? How do we know the emotions that we're feeling are right or wrong? So I do think it is very, very important to talk about this early on. And I do know as well, when I was younger and the other children in my family, when a family member died, we weren't allowed to go to the funeral as children. And I could never understand why not. I never understood. And actually, maybe that's a question I should have in my own family, because even today, I don't understand why I was hidden away from that. And is that healthy? I don't know. That is just a question. But to me, I wanted to go because I wanted to say goodbye, and I wanted to have that final closure and to be part of that picture. So yeah, I think these are difficult conversations, but they need to happen. Kamal, I saw your hand was up there.
Yeah, it is quite an important question, and I think it definitely comes up in everybody's experiences every now and then. Like just last night, out of the blue, my son was asking me, he was like, when I grow up, when I'll have my babies, will you be dead by then, Mom? And I was like, what makes you think that I'll be dead by then? I said, Richard, I don't know whether I'll be dead or I'll be alive. Nobody knows when somebody dies. And he was like, okay, so will you still be there? And I was like, I'm not sure. I don't know that, you know, and that is, I think, one of the biggest question to accept, situation to accept with death is that we don't know when what happens. So he's just thinking in his mind that he'll be at a certain phase. So that's one thing. And another, I think, our children come across death as a concept and not as a something that has happened to their own life. Like a couple of years back, my cousin passed away. He had cancer. And so my son saw me because I used to go visit him in the hospital. And then one day he passed away, and then we did all the rituals. And so he was just observing me. And then I told him that, you know, he passed away, he died. And so he had a lot of questions, a lot of curious questions. Okay, so what happens when somebody dies, or what happens? So that was his perspective of trying to understand what happens to the person when the person dies, you know, what happens to the person after that. And then there are individual beliefs, religious beliefs that sort of, you know, come to your aid to try and explain what you believe in to be true, you share with them. But then there is a different scenario where a child is impacted or affected by death. Then there's this other side as to what happens to me when somebody dies. That's a different, or what will happen to me. And that, I think, is something very significant, where they need a lot of hands-on, because then what you said, grief, and then knowing and acknowledging your own emotions and that sense of loss, that's the part where they need the most support. So one day we had this conversation where I was just asking my children to, help me with some chores, and they were like, what, this, that, and I was like, and then somehow we were also having this conversation about death, and then I was telling them, I said, what's going to happen if Mama dies tomorrow? They said, what? I said, all these work you would need to do yourself. And I'm like, okay. Though it was a very funny conversation, and I know that when reality strikes, it's very different. But I think to have an idea, to just have an idea in our minds as to how eventually it will look like, makes it, I think, a tad bit easier for people to deal with.
Thank you, Kamal. And Lorraine.
Actually, I think what Tracy and Kamal have covered is pretty much the way I view it as well. The thing that I would add is that I often say, I'm not really clear. There are different beliefs, and this is my belief. And there's so-and-so. This is the belief of this religion. This is the belief of so-and-so, and this is the belief. And I said, who knows? Maybe we're supposed to find out. Maybe we're not supposed to find out. But at this point, this is what I believe. What I do know, and my dad used to say this, actually, it's kind of funny. He'd always say, we all come into this world with a return ticket. And it kind of makes it very, it is what it is. We come into this world with a return ticket. And I just used to always say that when we were little, and nobody goes on forever. So we don't determine when who goes and how we go. And there's so many theories around that and so much studying. And I actually interesting this life we're in. I keep reading, I listen, I learn more, and the more I know, the less I know. And then I kind of make light of it. I get more confused, and so it kind of becomes a fun journey that everybody puts in their 2 cents worth. But I have never, I have lost friends when they were pretty young, like in their early 20s and such, and I recall myself trying to accept that. One of my friends she was 22, we just finished college, and it was an accident and she passed. And I was there when they found her body, and I can still see that, and it's traumatic. But I guess you start to accept these things literally when you have this return ticket concept in your mind, and that there is a higher power that determines when, how, where. Now, there are people who don't believe in a higher power and believe that when it's done, it's done. But who am I to say otherwise, right? I don't know anyway. So I'm just sharing what I think right now. And somehow this seems to go over well. I don't know. It's a serious topic. And we talk about grief. Yes, we feel very sad because we miss the person. But as of now, we don't know if the person misses us. Maybe they're onto something good and great. So who knows all these things? But yeah, we're used to talking to somebody, so that you feel that gap. The part that I do discuss, though, when it's death, and which I do remember talking to my kids about, was, yes, we miss the person. But one thing we need to ask ourselves, do we stop living because that person has gone? And that's something that is not the right way to deal with it. You honor the person, you celebrate their lives, you think about the good that happened. But what is not good is if we stop our lives and our living because we're so absorbed with grief. And that is something we can get over, we can live, and we can control. So, we don't have answers. And I love it. I love being vulnerable. It's just so freeing. You don't have to pretend that you know everything. You don't have to pretend to be the boss, the most knowledgeable. It's just great. I mean, and then people relate, oh, Yeah, she'll find out if she doesn't know, or she'll find out with us. So you're not raising yourself as a pedestal. I realize we're gone past time, but if there's one piece that that has worked well for me, is that I am just at their level. It's like, okay, some things I know, some things I don't. I'm not better than you, bigger than you. And we're just finding out everything. And what I know, I'll share with you. And that just liberates you. It makes the children want to talk with you more because they think, oh, she's growing up with us. It's pretty cool. It's worked for me. May not work for everybody, but.
Lorraine, I love that. What a great way to approach death and conversation in general. It all comes down to that. Ask the child what they think first before we even say, because death has a lot to do with faith, belief, and a child can have their own beliefs. You know, and I've actually asked some young people that question when they've said, oh, I'm really worried about death. Well, what does death mean to you? What do you think happens? And they've enlightened me. and me personally, I see death as, well, I better reach my legacy before I get there, because that's the end. So it's good if I tick all those boxes, then you know, I've done it, and I've got to the end of my life, because it is a cycle. And as I don't know who it is who says it, but the only two things that are sure in life are taxes and death. So we need to talk about it, and we need to accept it. And yeah, so I think it's interesting to dig into the beliefs of others. Thank you. Okay, so there's been a conversation going on in the chat. I don't know if you've seen it, but I'll just quickly read it from Chris. Where are we? Okay, it says, Lorraine, what I wanted to say was that the dialogue with school administrators is useful also in the other direction. My son was being bullied at age 12, and I encouraged him to defend himself as he was a bit timid. But we also went to the vice principal, and he suggested that this was not the right advice. It may go against the psychological makeup of the child. In fact, when I reflected on it, I too did not always defend myself, and the vice principal successfully resolved it with the other boy and his parents. And I believe there's some more on this. Sorry, there's a lot of chat. Once my wife and I had disagreement about reincarnation. Oh, so that's a different question. Okay, so bullying. Okay, and Chris said, my son, when he was 15 years old, witnessed the attack on the promenade in Nice as well, and he flew up immediately. And that is another story that he can tell. So there's lots of different areas here. We've got the attack in Nice, there's terrorism, there's bullying, there's all different areas that we won't have time to cover in this session. I think in regards to bullying, for me, my reaction is tailored to every single child, the situation, but it's still using that who, what, where, when, not why, and that open conversation with the child. I don't know if anyone else from reading those comments has anything to say. Kamal?
Yeah, so we had a very interesting conversation with one of the teacher in the school, I think, and that came to my mind when we were talking about bullying, is that usually what happens is that the first attention goes to the one who's getting bullied, to salvage. But I think the one who's bullying or who's supposedly bullying is the one who needs a lot of support. I think we've had this conversation, Leah, right? Yeah.
Yes, you've got me.
I remember that conversation, and that was so really true, because the one who is behaving in a way that's been called bullied also knows that what he or she is doing, and that's impacting him or her also psychologically. So yes, that's a topic in itself.
It is a topic in itself, and maybe we can address this in the future, because bullying is something that everyone can experience at all ages, and it's actually quite a deep topic. As we discussed, Kamal, it's not just the victim, it's also the bully and the why. On this occasion, we need to look into that and try and help both parties, but that is another conversation. So I would like to round up, because we have gone over, but I think that's okay. Sorry if anyone is off in a rush. I would like to round up with any coaching tools that anyone can recommend here. And I myself, when I was trained in youth work back in my master's many years ago, I was taught about a psychologist. He's a professor of psychology called Gerard Egan. Now, if you haven't heard of Gerard Egan, I recommend anyone out there to read his books. They're not the easiest of read, but they are. You've just got to kind of get into the flow, and he does put stuff in little boxes to kind of round up what he's saying. But Gerard has a series called The Skilled Helper. And just get the most recent, there's absolutely loads of them, but The Skilled Helper by Gerard Egan. And he talks about difficult conversations and how to have these with all different people. And I wrote some quotes down that he says, because I think they're very beautiful and very relevant to what we're talking about, which is, he says, during some of the most dramatic moments of life, simply being with another person is extremely important. And he also said that most people appreciate it when others pay attention to them. By the same token, being ignored is often painful. So by ignoring someone that's bringing up a topic can have painful or even detrimental effects. Gerard teaches something, it's an acronym called SOLAIRE, which I use a lot with the young people I work with, and it works wonders. It's about non-verbal communication. And the S is squarely. Now, this one is the only one I argue with, but squarely meaning sit opposite the person or on a slight angle, so it's not too intimidating when you're having a conversation, to show that you're there. However, in many of the conversations I've had with children, they've been under a table, jumping on top of the table, they've had their back to me, they've been crying or screaming, or they've got their hands over their eyes or their ears, or they've got their hood over their face. Do you know what? The worst thing I could do in that situation is tell that child to look at me. Look at me, I'm talking to you, you've lost them. So I let them, hood up, whatever. Do you know what? If I babble on, which I'm very good at, for enough time, they will hear me. They'll know that I'm there for them. They'll know that I'm trusting them, and they're going to eventually open up. And I use that squarely in basically any situation and sitting and standing that you possibly can to get that young person to open up. And especially children under the table, it happens very often. I sit down under the table with them, and then eventually I leave the table, which mirrors the behaviour for them, and then they start to come out. It works very well mirroring, actually, with teenagers. I don't know about children. The O stands for open posture. And that is super important, that, you know, keeping your hands open, not having your legs and your arms crossed. If you're like this, the child is not going to open up to you. You have to be open and relaxed. However, again, you're going to get teenagers and stuff like this. If you start off gently like that and open up slowly, you'll be surprised how that also enables a child to open up in a conversation. They mirror you naturally, not always. Yeah. The next one, the L, is lean towards the person. If you're showing interest, you're forward and you're talking. However, if that young person isn't forward, they might come forward a bit more if they're back, or if they're really forward and in your face and they're shouting at you and arguing, the best thing you can do at that point is actually lean back a little bit. And again, it's that mirroring. E is eye contact. I mean, that depends, gosh. I don't think I've had much eye contact with many teenagers until I've got to know them, but also culturally, you know, that's important to take into account. Some cultures, eye contact, you know, isn't appropriate and isn't comfortable. So just bear in mind that eye contact. However, I do try to keep eye contact because it does show you're listening, and children do like it. They seem to anyway, but I don't push it. And the next one is relaxed and natural. Just be you. We don't all have to be all teacher-like or get all serious. Just be relaxed. And I'm going to add something onto SOLAIRE, voice tone. Our tone of voice says so much. If we're very hyper and talking like this, it's quite aggressive and it can be edgy. If we're too calm and too slow, it can feel a bit therapeutic. So just watch our voice tone with young people, and emojis. a lot of young people don't want to talk anymore. They use the internet, they use text, get learning emojis, which ones are good, which ones aren't. And my dad thought lol was lots of love, and he put lots of love at the end of a text, which was it was a depressing text. It definitely didn't need a lol at the end of it. And he thought it was lots of love. So get to know that language to bring out that conversation as well. And just for me to end on my coaching tool, which is Gerard Egan in this case, he says, if you're empathetic and open-minded, let your posture mirror what's in your heart. And that for me is basically the key to having good conversations with children and young people. Tracy, Kamal, Lorraine, have you got any final notes and messages around coaching tools, etc.? Tracy.
Yes, I think you covered so much there. So I'm just going to add very quickly, I think self-coaching. And that for me is sometimes when I want to have a conversation, even just in general with somebody, I ask myself, what is my goal in having this conversation? What am I looking to achieve here? And, you know, I have to say that 85% of the time, I actually don't have the conversation because I realize that what I'm looking for is something that's I don't need or something I think I need, or it's something to do with my ego. And so I would think, you know, perhaps using that with your children, and you want to bring something up that's bothering you, ask yourself those questions. What is it that I'm looking to achieve here? What's my goal in raising this conversation? So that, and also just really sort of reflecting maybe later on a conversation that you've had and some of the feelings that have come up in that conversation and why they may have come up for you may help to separate those feelings from your child and help you evaluate about what, because those feelings are coming up in us because of something we're experiencing, not because something they've done to us.
Definitely. And actually, on that note, our next webinar, which is next week, is on that topic. It's on self-acceptance, or, oh, wait there, let me get this right. Self-awareness, sorry. So self-awareness in parenting, acceptance, and leadership as well as a parent. So actually, that was a nice natural flow into the next webinar. Thank you, Tracy. Kamal, Lorraine, any last things you'd like to say before we go? No. Okay, Kamal.
Yeah, so I think just like Tracy said, you know, for me also what works is like to have a structure and then have a lot of flexibility in between that structure. So it's like broadly knowing, being aware of, you know, what is it that you're talking about, but then allowing a lot of flexibility for things to change, to move, and conversations to flow. And sometimes, and I've noticed it, when we're just curious, exploring, because there are a lot of things, you know, children grow so fast. And if parents know that they know their children well at every given point of time, they don't. Because, and especially in these times, they outgrow a lot of things. So every conversation is a point, is an opportunity to know a new dimension of your own children. So that flexibility within that broad structure is, I think, that helps.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you, Tracy. And thank you so much, Lorraine, as well. And everyone out there. And yep, enjoy your difficult conversations with your children and good luck. And we hope this helped. Thank you very much. Bye.